Lingüística, investigación especial. Is it Spanish? According to Ralph Penny, Spanish is used to describe words that have Latin roots. Like all Romance languages, Spanish is a descendant of Latin. However, languages can change in various ways, which explains how new words have historically been added to the Spanish lexicon. Penny explains that languages can change in a few ways. The first is diatopically. This means that languages are influenced by their proximity to other languages. For instance, the Romance languages became distinct from one another due to geographic isolation. Pockets of vulgar Latin dialects across the empire were geographically isolated or did not share space with one another. This allowed for diachronic language change to happen. Small changes in pronunciation and the addition of different words over the course of generations made it so that once mutually intelligible dialects of Latin became unintelligible, or speakers could not understand each other. This is called diachronic language change. Finally, exposure of each group to other languages in closer proximity due to social, political, and economic changes led to the incorporation of borrowed words from different language families. This is sociolinguistic language change. While Ralph Penny argues that all other Romance languages are truly just dialects of Latin at the heart of it, most linguists agree that for two dialects to be considered the same language, they must be mutually intelligible. And Latin and Spanish aren't, though there are some similarities. In this linguistic special investigation, we will investigate Penny's claim to determine if in fact Spanish and all Romance languages are just dialects of Latin. Our discussion will include an analysis of some carefully selected words, as well as revealing the two reasons why Penny argues that Spanish is Latin. We will also explore some of the philosophical implications of determining which languages are distinct from one another. España, or Spain, comes from the Roman name for the Iberian Peninsula, Hispania. Romans ruled Hispania from approximately 19 BCE to circa 500 CE. Where the Romans got the name, however, is a controversial subject. Historians and linguists have given various explanations for where the name might have come from based on resemblances to words from other neighboring languages. Oeste, norte, este, and sur. These are the words for the cardinal directions in Spanish, and they share roots with both French and English. Old French, like Spanish, is a Romance language with Latin roots, and Old English is a Germanic language, not a Romance language. So how did these words get into Spanish? So while it seems plausible that the words for cardinal directions are cognates in French and Spanish, it seems perplexing why these words would also exist as cognates in Old English, since Old English and Old French did not influence each other at the point these words emerge. The answer is that the words for cardinal directions are Proto-Indo-European in origin. The Romance languages and the Germanic languages are both members of this language family. This is actually the Gothic word for moon, Mena. It is a cognate of many other Germanic languages and is not related to Spanish at all. The Spanish word for moon is luna. The word mena in Spanish actually means ore, as in iron ore. The reason that I brought up Mena was so that I could tell you a little bit about Visigoth Hispania. During the rule of the Visigoths over the Iberian Peninsula, Hispano-Romance speech, or the dialects of Latin spoken in the Iberian Peninsula, flourished. However, not much of the Gothic language ever made it into Spanish, despite the conquest of the Goths in Hispania. This is because by the time the Goths bothered to conquer Hispania, the Goths had already been sufficiently Latinized. They could use Latin as needed and were not interested in imposing their language onto the Iberian Peninsula. Usted. The word usted is interesting because the word itself is derived from the Spanish expression vuestro merced, but in fact is phonetically similar to the Arabic word for a doctor, professor, usteda. In Spanish, usted is a pronoun that denotes formality and is typically used when we are addressing someone in formal situations. Vuestro is Spanish and has a Latin root. The archaic expression vuestro merced in Spanish means your mercy, which is sort of like the term your grace that we see people throwing around in shows like The Tudors. Some other Spanish words of Arabic origin that are obvious are most of the words that begin with the Arab prefix al, like almohada, pillow, or almendra, almond. Mitjanit. This word is not Spanish, but it is spoken in Spain. This is the Catalan word for midnight. About 4 million people use Catalan as a first language, with many also speaking it as a second language. The role of the Catalan language has been a key issue in the Catalonian independence movement. This word is different in Spanish and Catalan. In Spanish, the word for midnight is medianoche. However, there are a lot of the words that are the same in Catalan and Spanish, for instance, the word sí or yes. Catalan has a lexical similarity to Spanish of 50%. However, it has a lexical similarity to Italian of 87%. This is a good time to explain Ralph Penny's first argument that Spanish is Latin. Penny claims that we only call the Romance languages distinct names because they are not mutually intelligible. He's right, because most linguists agree that for two languages to be considered the same, they must be mutually intelligible. So this argument doesn't seem to help his case at first. The Catalan word is much closer to the English word for midnight than the Spanish medianoche. The Latin word is nocte. Despite some surface differences, these words are all cognates. However, the word midnight seems to be a cognate across many languages. I will name most of the words for midnight on the languages that are still spoken on this chart so you can decide for yourself. The Catalan is mitjanit. The French is minuit. In Italian, mezzanoche. In Portuguese, medianoche. In Romanian, mieznoche. In Spanish, medianoche. And in Galician, medianoche. Provençal and Romanish were not available yet on Google Translate, so I could not provide those. As it turns out, the Catalan mitjanit is much closer to the English midnight than it is to the Spanish medianoche. The Latin word is nocte. However, the word night is not awfully different. So despite some surface differences, these words are all cognates. Old Dutch split off from Old German and led to the Dutch Middernacht. In Afrikaans, a language similar to Dutch spoken in South Africa, the word is Middernag. The direct descendants of Low German include modern Low German, which we can assume is Mitternacht. In Frisian, it's Middernacht, and in English, we have midnight. And of the High German branch, modern High German, we are going to assume is Mitternacht, like Low German. And we have Yiddish, which is Halbnacht, which would be like saying half night. We have the North Germanic branch, and direct descendants of which are Danish and Swedish. Both of these guys use the word midnatt. And the Old Norse branch of the North Germanic branch. Finally, to round off Germany, there is Norwegian, midnatt, and Icelandic, mithnathi. In the Celtic language family, there are Gaelic languages known as Irish and Scottish, respectively. In Scottish Gaelic, Maiden Orichi. In Irish, Maen Oichi. And finally, Welsh, Honornas. Finally, there is the Hellenic branch, where we find only modern Greek, Mezaniekta. Mycenae shares a close family resemblance with the languages on this chart. There's a few reasons why this is important. If, as Penny says, Spanish is just Latin, then how far can we go back? Can we say that every language on this chart is just European or Indo-European? If we did, how would we account for Spanish outside of Spain? Especially considering there are more Spanish speakers today who live outside of Spain than inside Spain. But wait, in Basque Country, another northern autonomous community of Spain, the word Gaudi is used for midnight. Izquierda. This common Spanish word actually came from euskara, which is the Basque or Euskaran word for left, izquierda. Euskara is the language spoken by the Basque people, an ethnic group in Spain and France that has its own identity as well as separatist sentiments on both sides of the Franco-Spanish border. 100,000 people speak Euskara, sometimes known as Basque, as their first language. Euskara is really special because it is a language isolate, meaning it is the only surviving member of a language family and has no known relatives. This means that it is not related to any of the Romance languages, or even the larger Indo-European language family that would include the Germanic languages we just discussed. The theme seems to be the politics of conquest can really modify the language situation in an area, so much so that Basque was in danger of becoming extinct. Pollo is the Galician word for chicken. It is very similar to the Spanish pollo. And while Galician shares many vocabulary words with Spanish, the syntax and vocabulary of Galician is actually more similar to Portuguese. According to Ethnologue, Spanish and Portuguese share an 89% lexical similarity. Portuguese and Galician have about an 85% mutual intelligibility. Galita, Galiza, or Galicia is an autonomous community of Spain and a historic nationality under Spanish law. It is located in the northwest of the Iberian Peninsula, right above Portugal. It developed along with Portuguese until the 14th century, when a split developed, largely for political reasons. As for the native Galician speaker, Portuguese is 85% intelligible. About 4 million people speak Galician. 3 million of them are in Spain. The rest are in Portugal, with a few communities in Latin America. The term Castilian or Castellano is used for Spanish in Spain. You could also say this is Peninsular Spanish or European Spanish. Its origins are in the regional dialect of Vulgar Latin in Castile in central Spain, which became the standard for Spanish around approximately 1000 CE. The Castilians spoke one of the unique varieties of this speech, and by 11th century they had conquered many territories and established the Kingdom of Castile. The first grammar of Castilian, or of any modern European language, was published in 1492 by Antonia de Nebrija, beginning the process of the standardization into modern Spanish. The takeaway from this is that there are many dialects and languages spoken in Spain that are not Castilian. Some are dialects of Spanish in Spain that differ in spoken form but follow the same written rules, like Andalusian Spanish. This time in history, the early 16th century, ushered in the rise of nation-states as well as colonialism. Just like Spain, other monarchs fought to delineate their territories and conquer others, and nation-states emerged, with distinct standardized versions of what once were regional dialects of Vulgar Latin. However, beginning in 1492, there would be many places outside of España that would use Spanish. Maíz is actually a word of the Taño Arawak, and words like these make it into the Spanish lexicon during the colonial period. The Taño were an indigenous people of the Caribbean, and at the time of European contact in the late 15th century, they were the principal inhabitants of most of Cuba, the Dominican Republic and Haiti, which is known as Hispaniola, Jamaica, Puerto Rico, the Bahamas, and the northern Lesser Antilles. The Taño were the first New World peoples to be encountered by the awful Christopher Columbus during his 1492 voyage. They spoke the Taño language, an Arawakian language. The region that was carved out of North America, South America, Central America, and the Caribbean is known as Latin America. This term also includes Brazil, where Portuguese is spoken. To refer to Spanish dialects spoken in Latin America, the term Español is used. Many native languages were spoken in Latin America before the Spanish colonized America in the 14th century. The native populations in this region became Spanish subjects who were required to learn the language of their conqueror. However, there were many new things in America for which the Europeans had no names, and so many native words were borrowed. As a result, many indigenous words are incorporated into both Castellano and Español. During this period of independence, Spanish was a lingua franca, or a common language to share ideas among people of all social groups. The unity that the shared language provided aided in achieving the goal of independence from Spain. While native languages struggled to survive under colonization in New Spain, generations of bilingualism ensured that many indigenous words would be incorporated into the language of Español. The influence of different native languages dependent on region helps account for the variety of Spanish dialects. Indigenous languages of South America include, among others, the Quechua languages, the Aymara, the Wayu. So far, we revealed the mysterious origins of common Spanish words, as well as Penny's two arguments for why Spanish and all the other Romance languages are Latin. First, we only call them different things to avoid confusion, because speakers won't understand each other. Second, without the rise of nation-states, they would all still be Vulgar Latin. Despite what Penny says, since linguists agree that intelligibility is a huge factor, the difference in syntax and lexicon is too great for speakers to understand each other. So by that definition, we can't really say that Spanish is Latin. Penny's statement, though provocative, could actually be saying more about Latin than it does about Spanish. What Penny might be getting at is Latin never actually died like Cornish did. It just morphed and changed into the Romance languages that we know today. Without the rise of nation-states, perhaps Europe would still speak just different dialects of Latin, which would be mostly intelligible, maybe. However, over the past 500 plus years, the sociolinguistic situation in this region has created a great divergence. While it might be hyperbole to say that Spanish is Latin, I do agree with the point that Latin never actually died. Another compelling reason why Spanish is not Latin is that many Spanish words have a deeper Indo-European root that precedes Latin, like the cardinal directions or describing a particular time of day, like midnight. If we consider Spanish to be Latin, need we consider all of the European languages to be the same language? Because by that logic, European never died either. Yet another reason that many Spanish words were borrowed during the Islamic period and the colonial period. Yet another reason is that many Spanish words were borrowed during the Islamic period and the colonial period. In Latin America, Spanish is influenced by words from indigenous languages and English. What makes a word Spanish? With the many Spanish dialects that are geographically isolated and tied to unique cultures and histories outside of Spain, should we really call them all Spanish, especially since there are more Spanish speakers outside of Spain? You might argue that they should be distinct. After all, Galician and Portuguese have their own languages, even though they are 85% mutually intelligible. The truth is, we live in a world that is much more global than we did when Galicia split from Portugal and nation-states emerged. Spanish is used around the world, and Spanish speakers in many countries are connected. While the more extreme of each dialect might be trickier to understand, there is more than enough overlap, especially syntactically. This is much the case with English as well. American, British, and Australian are all dialects of English. So what can we say about the words that we discussed today? As far as España and the cardinal directions, they are Spanish, even though they have much deeper roots because they are historically part of the Latin lexicon. The Gothic mena never made it into the Spanish lexicon, though it does have a homophone that exists in Spanish with a different meaning. Usted. The origins of usted are tricky, but led to the discussion of many Arab loanwords. These words were incorporated into what would emerge as Spanish in the 11th century. Mitjanit, Izquierda, and Pollo come from Catalan, Basque, and Galician. And though these languages are each distinct, they are officially recognized languages in Spain. This leads some to describe these languages as Spanish, in a geographic sense. However, nationalist movements like the one in Catalonia might soon make that a moot point. As for maíz, papa, and aguacate, all of indigenous origin, these are used by Hispanic people when speaking Spanish. So in some ways, the answer to the question, is it Spanish, would be yes for all these words. As our society becomes more global, the question of language, nationality, and culture is important. It is important that people of different nations, communities, and cultures are united. However, it's understandable that they may want to preserve some of the things that make their culture unique. Language plays a large role in this. Some language rise to be dominant in an area and wipe out other languages in that region. On the other hand, you have a language like Spanish or English or Russian that are so important for trade and education that they are widespread and they strangle the languages native to the areas that they come to. While in the past we didn't have the foresight to understand how important it is to preserve languages, because once they are dead, they are truly dead forever. In the past, we didn't have the foresight to preserve languages. It's important because once they are truly dead, they are dead forever. What dies with those languages is an entire universe of nuanced knowledge. In Spain, there are 3 minority languages that are recognized as official languages, which aids in their ability to survive. In Latin America, many countries recognize indigenous languages as co-official languages as well. That's it for this special linguistic investigation. Next time, I hope you'll know, is it Spanish?